My friends, whenever we speak of discipline or the capacity to undertake what is difficult, we must understand that we are not merely dealing with acts of the will. We are confronting the ancient architecture of the psyche itself. The human being is a creature divided, one part striving toward consciousness, meaning, and individuation, and another seeking comfort, safety, and the familiar ruts of habit. In every man and woman, there is a tension between the call of the future and the gravity of the past. And it is precisely in this conflict where the drama of our inner life unfolds. To speak of doing hard things is, therefore, to speak of awakening the deeper self, the part of us that wishes not for ease but for expansion. Yet most individuals live in a perpetual negotiation with their own unconscious forces. Their actions are not guided by intention but compelled by old patterns, unresolved fears, and shadow elements they have not yet confronted. They assume lack of discipline is a moral failure when, in truth, it is an absence of inner integration. You see, the psyche does not respond to commands, it responds to meaning. If you attempt to impose discipline upon yourself as though you were a prisoner under surveillance, the unconscious rebels. But when discipline becomes an expression of who you are becoming, when it takes root in the soil of purpose, then the psyche aligns itself willingly with your conscious aims. In this way, the mind slowly learns to desire what once frightened it. Therefore, I would like to propose a simple but profoundly transformative idea. If you spend 30 days cultivating a different relationship with yourself, one rooted not in coercion but in integrity, your mind will eventually begin to request the very challenges it once resisted. Not because the tasks are easier, but because you have become deeper, clearer, and more unified. Over the next hour, we will examine this process. We will consider why the mind instinctively avoids difficulty, how self-respect becomes the cornerstone of discipline, and how small conscious promises kept faithfully can reorganize the architecture of the personality. We will explore a 30-day method through which the scattered fragments of the self begin to cohere, forming a stronger internal center from which genuine discipline emerges. You are not here to learn how to force your mind into submission. You are here to learn how to reconcile with it, how to create a relationship in which the unconscious cooperates with your conscious intentions. For only then does effort cease to be torment and become, instead, the natural movement of a matured and integrated personality. This is the beginning. From here, we move deeper. When we consider why the mind instinctively recoils from difficulty, we must begin with a simple but often overlooked truth. The psyche is not designed for your comfort, nor for your ambition, but for your survival. For thousands of years, the human organism learned that familiarity was safety, that any deviation from routine carried unknown dangers. The ancient mind still alive within each of us believes that what is predictable will keep us alive, while what is challenging might destroy us. And so, without our awareness, the unconscious places a protective hand over us, whispering, avoid, retreat, remain as you are. But this instinctual avoidance, which once preserved life, now limits it. What safeguarded our ancestors from physical threats now hinders us from confronting psychological ones. We recoil from the difficult task not because it is objectively harmful, but because it is symbolically tied to the unknown. And the unknown, in Jungian psychology, is the very face of the unconscious, unmapped, unpredictable, often feared. Whenever you attempt to undertake something demanding, whether a new habit, a discipline, or a personal transformation, you are not merely fighting laziness. You are wrestling with an ancient inner guardian that equates all change with danger. In this sense, the resistance you feel is not personal failure. It is a universal inheritance. Furthermore, the mind avoids difficulty because it reflects back to us the parts of ourselves we have not yet mastered. Every challenge is a mirror. It reveals our insecurities, our inadequacies, our unresolved shadows. We often avoid the task not because the task itself is hard, but because its completion requires confronting aspects of our personality we would rather ignore. What we call procrastination is often a disguised fear of self-encounter. There is also the matter of psychic fragmentation. When a person has not formed a strong inner center, when the ego, the shadow, and the self remain disjointed, action becomes laborious. The individual feels scattered, pulled in several conflicting directions, one part desiring improvement, another clinging to comfort, another sabotaging progress out of fear or unresolved wounds. Without integration, the psyche resembles a parliament of competing voices, none of which speak with authority. This is why forcing oneself into discipline rarely works. The fragmented mind cannot sustain unified effort. One part of you resolves to act, while another part quietly undermines it, seeking relief from the perceived threat of change. Until the personality begins to cohere, until the unconscious is brought into conscious dialogue, discipline remains an internal civil war. But here is the crucial insight. The mind avoids hard things, not because you are weak, but because your inner world is uncoordinated. The personality has not yet found its axis. And without an axis, movement is erratic. Therefore, before we can learn to embrace challenge, we must understand the forces within us that resist it. We are not battling tasks. We are negotiating with the deeper layers of the psyche. And once you comprehend this inner landscape, you will see that the avoidance of difficulty is not a flaw to condemn, but a pattern to re-educate. And re-education begins with the smallest possible promise. If we are to transform the inner life in such a way that discipline becomes natural rather than forced, we must begin with the smallest and most overlooked phenomenon, the promise one makes to oneself. It may appear trivial, even childish, but psychologically it is fundamental, for every promise kept strengthens the unity of the psyche, and every promise broken deepens its division. You see, the human personality is not a simple structure. It is composed of many layers, impulses, instincts, memories, ideals, and shadows, each possessing its own tendencies. When you make a commitment, one part of you speaks the intention, but another part must carry it out. If these parts are disconnected, your actions will betray your words. And every time this occurs, the psyche learns a subtle lesson that the self cannot be trusted. This is why individuals so often feel powerless in the face of their own goals. Their unconscious has, through repeated betrayals, concluded that their conscious intentions are not to be taken seriously. Their inner world becomes like a child who, after being promised many things by an unreliable parent, stops believing in every new vow. And once the unconscious ceases to believe, motivation collapses. For the unconscious is the source of energy, of drive, of instinct. Without its cooperation, discipline becomes an exhausting battle. Consider what happens when you say, "Tomorrow I will rise early," and then fail to do so. Consciously, you may offer explanations, excuses, justifications, but the unconscious registers only one fact: the intention was not embodied. And the psyche does not grow through intentions, it grows through action. Now, what Jim Rohn articulated in practical language is precisely what depth psychology teaches symbolically, that the integrity of the personality is built through the alignment of word and deed. When you keep a promise to yourself, no matter how small, you fuse two psychological forces, will and action. This fusion strengthens what we call the ego-self axis, the inner bridge between consciousness and the deeper layers of the psyche. And when this axis strengthens, the personality begins to act with coherence rather than conflict. In more profound terms, keeping a promise assembles the fragments of the self into a unified whole. It gives the unconscious a reason to support your conscious aims. Gradually, the inner parliament that once argued against you begins to align with you. The scattered voices harmonize. The psyche becomes organized. And through this organization, discipline emerges as a natural expression of inner order, not as an external imposition. But the opposite is equally true. When you repeatedly break promises to yourself, you create what Jung would call psychic disintegration. Your energy becomes diffused, your will weakened, your capacity for direction eroded. The individual who cannot trust himself to follow through becomes divided against himself. And a divided psyche cannot pursue difficult goals because a part of it no longer believes the journey is real. Therefore, the true purpose of a promise is not the task itself, it is the restoration of inner authority. It is the act of demonstrating to your own unconscious, I am capable of speaking and acting as one. This internal credibility becomes the very foundation upon which discipline, courage, and responsibility are built. Thus, the path to doing difficult things begins with something almost laughably small, a promise you can keep today, yet do not underestimate its power. The smallest seed, when planted in fertile soil, can grow roots deep enough to reshape the entire landscape of the psyche. This is where the 30-day transformation begins, not with grand ambition, but with the quiet, steady cultivation of inner trust. If we wish to reorient the psyche so that discipline becomes a natural companion rather than an adversary, we must establish a pattern that slowly reorganizes the inner world. A transformation of this kind cannot be achieved through dramatic resolutions or feverish bursts of enthusiasm. Such attempts collapse because they lack psychological foundation. What we require instead is a gentle but consistent ritual, a period of time in which the self is realigned through simple, repeatable acts of integrity. This is why I propose a 30-day reset, not as a moral commandment, but as a symbolic journey. 30 days is long enough to influence the unconscious, yet short enough for the conscious mind to endure. It is a span of time that invites reflection, rhythm, and inward observation. And within this period, we will cultivate 4 daily promises, each one addressing a dimension of the human personality: the physical, the mental, the ethical, and the visionary. Let us examine each of these. 4.1, the physical promise. Reclaiming the body as an ally. Every psychological effort must be grounded in the body. For the body is not merely a vessel. It is the living expression of the unconscious, speaking through fatigue, appetite, posture, breath. If the body is neglected, the psyche becomes unstable. Therefore, the first daily promise is small and physical. A brief walk, a simple exercise, a moment of intentional movement. Why does this matter? Because when you move the body with purpose, you awaken the instinctive layers of the psyche. You remind the unconscious that the will is active, that life is in motion. This does not require intensity, it requires consistency. A daily act of physical discipline becomes a message to the entire personality. We are capable of action. 4.2, the mental promise, nourishing the conscious mind. The second promise is an intellectual one. 5 minutes of reading, a page of journaling, a moment of still reflection. The mind, like a flame, must be fed, or it flickers and dims. When you deliberately nourish the intellect each day, you deepen your connection to consciousness itself. You assert that your life is not governed by instinct alone, but shaped by thought, examination, and meaning. And you will find that this small act carries great symbolic weight. It declares to the unconscious, we seek understanding. And when the unconscious perceives a sincere desire for understanding, it becomes less resistant and more cooperative, for it recognizes that growth is occurring within the realm of consciousness. 4.3, the character promise, strengthening the ethical core. The third promise is the most subtle. One small act of character. Perhaps you express gratitude, fulfill an overlooked responsibility, or extend help to another. This seems minor, but psychologically it is profound. For character is not built in grand gestures, but in recurrent, consistent behavior. Each act becomes a stone laid upon the inner foundation of the self. And here we see something essential. When the personality behaves with integrity toward others, it becomes easier to behave with integrity toward oneself. The ego becomes aligned with a deeper ethical structure, and this alignment strengthens the inner axis around which discipline can form. 4.4, the vision promise, orienting toward the future self. Lastly, the fourth promise concerns your relationship to the future. Each day, ask yourself, what one action today moves me toward the person I wish to become? This need not be large. It is enough that you take a single conscious step toward the future ideal. The psyche thrives on orientation. A life without vision drifts into chaos. A life with vision gradually arranges itself into order. When you take daily action towards your future, you signal to the unconscious that the future is real, that the self is emerging, that the path ahead has meaning. And meaning, as we know, is the force that binds the psyche into wholeness. These four promises, body, mind, character, and vision, constitute the daily ritual of the 30-day reset. They are simple, yes, but their simplicity is their power. The unconscious does not respond to dramatic resolutions. It responds to patterns, repetition, rhythm. When you keep these four promises each day, you are weaving new pathways into the psyche, strengthening the inner structure that makes discipline possible. For 30 days, you are not trying to change your entire life. You are restoring the relationship you have with yourself. And once that relationship is healed, the mind will no longer resist what challenges it. It will embrace difficulty as the path toward individuation, the journey toward becoming whole. When we speak of the power of small daily wins, we are not discussing a productivity strategy or a motivational trick. We are touching something far older and far more fundamental. The gradual reordering of the human psyche. For the psyche is not transformed through great upheavals or sudden bursts of willpower. Rather, it changes through what Jung called the slow, organic process of individuation, a steady integration of fragmented parts into a coherent whole. Each small discipline, each kept promise, acts as a tiny alignment between conscious intention and unconscious energy. You may believe that a 5-minute walk or a single page of reading has little consequence in the vast landscape of your life, but the unconscious sees it differently. To the unconscious, every small act of discipline is a symbolic declaration, I am becoming someone who acts with purpose. And symbols are the language through which the unconscious speaks. A small act, if repeated, becomes a symbol of reliability. A repeated symbol becomes a pattern. A pattern becomes a structure, and a structure becomes a new psychological identity. This is why small daily wins compound. It is not the physical act that matters, but the meaning the unconscious assigns to it. If you tell yourself, I am a person who completes my responsibilities, and you follow that with action, then your psyche absorbs the message. If repeated, the message becomes encoded into the personality. And when the personality shifts, behavior ceases to be forced. It flows naturally from the new center of being. Jim Rohn expressed this principle in plain language. Success is predictable. In psychological terms, we could say that once a pattern is firmly rooted in the unconscious, it produces predictable results not because the world has changed, but because you perceive differently, choose differently, respond differently. The environment remains the same. The interpreter has evolved. Small daily wins also counteract one of the most destructive tendencies of the modern psyche, the craving for immediate transformation. Many individuals attempt to leap into grand ambitions only to collapse beneath their own expectations. Their conscious mind demands progress, but their unconscious remains unprepared, unaligned, unintegrated. The effort exhausts them because the personality is split, one part striving, another resisting. But when you embrace the mechanism of small wins, you honor the tempo of the psyche. You understand that lasting change requires patience, consistency, and humility. Each day becomes a quiet negotiation with the unconscious, a gentle reminder we are capable of movement, we are capable of growth, and through repetition, the unconscious begins to trust this claim. It supplies energy rather than withholding it. The compounding effect emerges when these daily promises overlap. Physical action strengthens your vitality. Mental engagement sharpens your awareness. Character choices deepen your integrity. Visionary steps align you with your future. Each element supports the others, creating a psychological ecosystem in which discipline is no longer a struggle, but a natural continuation of your internal order. The mind, observing your consistency, ceases its rebellion. It no longer fears that action will lead to chaos or failure. It begins to see discipline as a safe and meaningful pattern of movement toward wholeness. Thus, the compounding of small daily wins is not merely practical, it is symbolic, structural, and archetypal. It represents the gradual emergence of the self, the deeper center of the personality, guiding the individual toward clarity, strength, and inner unity. And once this process begins, it is difficult to stop. For the psyche, having tasted alignment, seeks more of it. The mind, once fearful of challenge, begins to crave the dignity that discipline brings. At a certain point in this process, a point difficult to predict, yet unmistakable when it arrives, a shift begins to occur within the psyche. What once felt laborious, burdensome, or antagonistic slowly becomes natural, even desired. The individual experiences a subtle but profound transition. The mind stops resisting effort and begins to seek it. This is not merely a change in preference, it is a change in psychological orientation. It suggests that the inner world has reorganized itself in response to your consistent actions. Let us examine the mechanisms that make this transformation possible. 6.1, the familiarity principle. The unknown becomes known. In the early stages, difficulty represents the unfamiliar and the unconscious, shaped by a long evolutionary history, reacts to the unfamiliar as though it were a threat. But as you engage repeatedly with small disciplines, these behaviors cease to exist on the margins of your awareness. They become integrated into your daily life. The psyche's fear diminishes not through argument, but through exposure, through ritual, through repetition, through lived experience. The hard thing becomes familiar, and what is familiar becomes less frightening. In this way, the unconscious slowly lowers its defenses and allows the ego greater freedom of movement. 6.2. The identity principle. You become someone who acts. Every repeated behavior shapes identity. If you perform a task once, it is an event. If you perform it daily, it becomes part of who you are. Jung taught that identity is not discovered, but built, constructed through the choices we make and the attitudes we adopt toward ourselves. When you keep your daily promises, the unconscious takes note. It begins to rewrite its internal narrative about you. No longer are you the inconsistent dreamer, the person who tries and fails, the individual whose intentions dissolve at the first sign of difficulty. You become, in the mind's symbolic language, the one who acts. And once this identity stabilizes, the psyche naturally gravitates toward behaviors that confirm and strengthen it. 6.3, the reward principle. The psyche learns to love integrity. There is a particular satisfaction that arises not from pleasure, but from alignment, from knowing that your actions match your intentions. This satisfaction is not superficial, it is a deep psychological nourishment. It is the psyche's way of signaling that inner unity has increased. Each completed task, each fulfilled promise, generates a small surge of dignity. And dignity, unlike excitement or motivation, is a stable emotion. It endures. The unconscious, sensing the emergence of this dignity, begins to steer you toward the behaviors that produce it. Thus, discipline becomes not a punishment, but a source of psychic strength. 6.4, the momentum principle. Effort generates energy. Contrary to the common assumption, effort does not always drain energy. When the personality is aligned, effort can generate energy. This is the phenomenon of momentum. Just as a river gathers force as it flows, the psyche gathers vitality when its actions are coherent and purposeful. Momentum appears when the unconscious no longer interferes with the ego's intentions. Resistance fades, action becomes fluid. The tasks that once required immense exertion now unfold with ease, not because they are intrinsically easy, but because the entire personality now moves in the same direction. And so, the mind begins to want what it once avoided. The individual finds themselves seeking challenge, embracing struggle, and pursuing growth, not as a moral obligation, but as an instinctive movement toward wholeness. This is the psychological reward for inner alignment. The psyche, once fragmented, begins to cohere. And in that coherence lies a new form of freedom, the freedom to act without internal opposition. In this stage, discipline is no longer forced. It is invited. Whenever an individual embarks upon a process of inner transformation, it is inevitable that they will encounter resistance, relapse, and moments of apparent failure. These interruptions are not signs that the psyche is malfunctioning. They are signs that the psyche is reorganizing. One must understand that the unconscious does not surrender its old habits without a struggle. It will test your new commitments, not out of malice, but out of instinct. The unconscious clings to what is known, even when the known is harmful. And so when you falter, it is not merely forgetfulness or laziness, it is a temporary reassertion of the old psychic configuration. The first obstacle, therefore, is not the slip-up itself, but the interpretation you attach to it. Many individuals fall into despair at the slightest inconsistency. They view a missed day, a broken promise, or a moment of weakness as evidence of personal inadequacy. But this reaction reveals a grave misunderstanding of psychological growth. The psyche does not evolve in a straight line. It oscillates, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Such oscillation is the natural rhythm of transformation. When a slip occurs, it simply means that the unconscious is asserting an older pattern. It is testing whether your new orientation is genuine or merely a passing enthusiasm. The appropriate response is neither self-criticism nor resignation. The appropriate response is conscious re-engagement. In practical language, Jim Rohn expressed this with elegant simplicity. Don't miss twice. In psychological terms, we might say, do not allow the old pattern to regain dominance. Interrupt it swiftly. Reaffirm your intention through action, and the unconscious will, in time, yield to the new direction. A second obstacle emerges from the shadow, the hidden, unacknowledged aspects of the personality. When you strive to cultivate discipline and order, your shadow often responds with sabotage, not because it wishes your downfall, but because it fears annihilation. The old habits, the comforts, the evasions, all belong to the shadow, and when they sense that the ego is attempting to outgrow them, they resist. This resistance may appear as doubt, fatigue, irritability, or sudden disinterest. The key is not to repress these reactions, but to observe them with curiosity, to say, here is the part of me that fears change. Here is the old self struggling to remain alive. Only through such observation does integration become possible. You cannot discipline yourself into wholeness by suppressing the shadow. You must approach it with understanding. When you recognize that resistance is simply the psyche's fear of transformation, it loses its power to derail you. Another obstacle is the inflation of expectations. Many individuals begin a period of discipline with unrealistic fantasies of perfection. They imagine that after a few days of effort, the entire psyche will submit obediently to their commands. But perfection is the enemy of transformation. When you demand flawlessness, the unconscious feels cornered, threatened, and overwhelmed. It retreats into avoidance. Sustainable change requires patience. It requires humility. It requires the acceptance that you are dealing with ancient forces that cannot be bent by sheer will alone. Therefore, the correct attitude toward obstacles and slip-ups is an attitude of balance, not indulgence, but understanding, not self-condemnation, but self-awareness. The mistake is not the failure. The mistake is interpreting failure as final. The psyche learns not from your moments of triumph, but from your manner of recovery. Each time you return to your ritual after stumbling, you strengthen the ego self-axis. You demonstrate to the unconscious that your intention is unwavering, that your direction is sincere. In this way, obstacles become teachers, slip-ups become mirrors, resistance becomes dialogue, and through this dialogue, the psyche gradually realigns itself, not through violence, but through persistence. Growth is not the absence of relapse, it is the refusal to be defined by it. Now, having explored the psychological foundations of discipline, its resistances, its transformations, and the role of symbolic promises, we can turn our attention to the practical structure of the 30-day journey. But remember, practicality in this context is not merely a matter of schedules or checklists. It is the deliberate creation of a ritual space in which the psyche can reorganize itself. Each week of the plan serves as a distinct psychological phase, guiding you gradually from intention to integration. Think of this plan not as a prescription, but as a symbolic map. Its purpose is not to constrain you, but to orient you, to help you walk consciously toward a deeper unity within yourself. Week 1 foundation, establishing the 4 promises. The first week is the planting of the seed. Here, you introduce the 4 daily promises: physical, mental, character, and vision. The tasks are small, almost deceptively so, but psychologically they carry great weight. Their purpose is not to challenge your strength, but to awaken the psyche to a new pattern of intentional living. The conscious mind initiates the promise. The unconscious mind observes whether you act. During this first week, the psyche is watchful. It is evaluating your seriousness. Do not attempt heroics. Instead, adopt a gentle determination. Show the unconscious that you can create a rhythm, a structure, a daily ritual. These 7 days are not about performance. They are about signaling. The message is, we are beginning anew. Week 2, consistency. Establishing inner credibility. By the second week, something subtle begins to happen. The tasks, once unfamiliar, start to weave themselves into the fabric of your day. Here, the primary objective is consistency. Not intensity, consistency. Your aim is to demonstrate reliability. During this phase, many individuals feel a slight friction. The novelty has faded, but the deeper transformation has not yet begun. This is where the ego's resolve is tested. Yet it is also the phase in which inner credibility grows fastest. Every completed day strengthens the psychological bridge between intention and action. This week whispers to the unconscious, "You can trust me more than before." Do not underestimate the power of such trust. It is the foundation upon which the later stages depend. Week 3, momentum. The emergence of desire for discipline. If the first week is planting the seed, and the second is watering it, then the third week is when the first green shoots emerge. Visible, fragile, yet unmistakably alive, this is the week in which the psyche begins to shift. Hard things become less aversive, perhaps even appealing. You may feel a growing internal order, a coherence that was previously absent. The unconscious, now more trusting, begins to provide energy instead of resisting your efforts. You feel less scattered, more grounded. The tasks, still small, begin to feel symbolic of a new identity taking shape within you. You may find yourself acting without hesitation. What was once a burden begins to feel like nourishment. In this week, discipline ceases to be an external demand and begins to feel like an inner calling. It is here that the psyche murmurs, "We are becoming someone new." Week 4, identity, consolidating the new inner structure. By the 4th week, the ritual has become a psychological home. The actions may remain simple, but their meaning deepens. They are no longer tasks. They are expressions of the emerging self. This is the week in which discipline becomes an identity rather than an effort. In Jungian language, we might say that the ego-self axis has strengthened. Conscious intention and unconscious energy now work in unison. The internal fragmentation that once caused resistance has less influence. You experience a sense of psychological alignment, a feeling that your actions reflect the person you are becoming, not merely the person you were trying to be. This week is not about doing more. It is about being more. It is about inhabiting a new psychological posture. You might notice a distinct shift, more clarity in decisions, more confidence in movement, more serenity in moments of challenge. This is not accidental. It is the result of repeated symbolic actions forming a stable inner structure. The psyche, having integrated the pattern, now expresses it naturally. When the 30 days conclude, you reach not an endpoint, but a threshold. You stand at the entrance to a deeper journey. The ritual you performed was not about building habits. It was about building a center, a place within you strong enough to sustain discipline without inner conflict. The new center is not perfect, but it is real. It is not finished, but it is formed. And from this center, the psyche can move toward greater challenges without fracturing. The purpose of these 30 days was not to change your life instantly, but to reorganize the architecture of the self so that change becomes possible, natural, steady, and internally supported. The journey that follows will be easier, not because the world softens, but because you have strengthened the axis around which your life turns. As we arrive at the conclusion of this exploration, I invite you to reflect on what has truly taken place within these ideas. We have not merely discussed discipline, nor have we explored motivation or the practicalities of habit formation. What we have examined, instead, is the ancient and intimate dialogue between the ego and the unconscious, the conversation that determines the shape of your life far more profoundly than any external circumstance. You must understand, transformation is not a matter of force, it is a matter of relationship. When the ego wages war against the unconscious always prevails, for it is deeper, older, and more powerful. But when the ego approaches the unconscious with sincerity, through small promises, consistent action, and humble persistence, the unconscious responds in kind. It lends its energy, its instinct, its vitality, and suddenly what once required immense effort becomes almost effortless. This is why a 30-day period of integrity is so significant. It is not the number of days that matters. It is the symbolic act of showing the psyche that you are capable of unity. 30 days is long enough for the unconscious to take your intention seriously, yet short enough for the ego to maintain consistency. In this span of time, you are not merely building habits. You are reconstructing an inner covenant, an agreement between your conscious aspirations and your deeper nature. If you complete this journey with sincerity, you will discover that discipline is not a punishment imposed upon the self. It is a form of self-respect. It is the affirmation that you are no longer willing to live in fragmentation, contradiction, or self-betrayal. You are choosing to become whole. And when wholeness begins to emerge, the psyche takes notice. It begins to guide you rather than obstruct you. It begins to desire the very challenges that once overwhelmed you. In this sense, the greatest reward of discipline is not achievement, nor success, nor any external outcome, though these may follow. The greatest reward is the birth of a new orientation toward life, a deeper, more integrated self, a self capable of carrying its own destiny with courage and clarity. So I leave you with this thought. The future you seek cannot be reached by the person you are today. It can only be reached by the person you are becoming. And becoming is not a dramatic leap. It is a steady unfolding, one promise at a time. If you wish to begin, do so gently, but begin earnestly. Choose one physical promise, one mental promise, one act of character, and one gesture toward your future. Honor them for 30 days. Allow the psyche to reorganize itself around these simple acts. And you will soon discover that the mind, once hesitant or resistant, begins to support you, encourage you, and ultimately guide you. Give yourself 30 days, and you will not merely change your habits, you will change the axis of your inner world.